Story 1: The Factory of Nightmares. The job. Jack had just graduated from college and landed a job at a large manufacturing plant. The job was entry-level but promised plenty of room for advancement. His first day was supposed to be a simple orientation, but things took a dark turn very quickly. The setting. The plant was an enormous, sprawling facility filled with loud machinery, dim lighting, and an oppressive atmosphere. The building was old, with parts of it showing clear signs of neglect. Jack's orientation was scheduled to take place in a small office tucked away in one of the plant's quieter corners. The incident. Jack arrived early and was greeted by his supervisor, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson seemed friendly enough, though there was a certain unease about him. After a brief introduction, he led Jack on a tour of the plant. The noise and heat were overwhelming, and Jack felt a growing sense of dread as they moved deeper into the labyrinthine building. As they approached the more remote sections of the plant, Mr. Wilson began to share some of the site's history. He mentioned that several accidents had occurred over the years, many of them fatal. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. During the tour, they passed a large, rusted door marked "Do Not Enter, Mr." Wilson paused and told Jack that this was an old storage area no longer in use. He warned Jack to stay away from it and moved on. However, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the door. The horror. Later that day, during his lunch break, curiosity got the better of Jack. He decided to take a closer look at the door. As he approached, he noticed a faint, foul odor emanating from behind it. The smell grew stronger the closer he got. Ignoring the warning, he slowly pushed the door open. Inside was a large, dark room filled with old machinery and stacks of decaying boxes. The smell was almost unbearable. As Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were dark stains on the floor and walls, and the air felt heavy with a sense of foreboding. Jack turned to leave but froze when he heard a faint sound behind him. He slowly turned back around and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was an old man, his clothes tattered and his eyes filled with a haunting emptiness. The man began to speak in a raspy voice, telling Jack that he had been trapped in the room for years, a victim of one of the plant's many accidents. Jack stumbled backward, heart racing, and fled the room, slamming the door behind him. He ran back to the main area of the plant, desperately trying to find Mr. Wilson. When he finally did, he blurted out what had happened. Mr. Wilson's face went pale. He explained that the old man Jack had seen was believed to have died in a tragic accident years ago, but his body was never recovered. The plant had tried to cover up the incident to avoid bad publicity. Jack's discovery had brought a dark secret to light. The aftermath. Jack quit the job the next day, unable to shake the experience. The factory was eventually investigated, and the truth about the numerous accidents and cover-ups was exposed. The plant was shut down, but the horrors Jack experienced on his first day stayed with him for the rest of his life. Story 2: The Haunted Hospital. The job. Sarah had always wanted to work in healthcare, so when she got a job as a nurse at a local hospital, she was thrilled. Her first day was supposed to be an introduction to the hospital's procedures and a tour of the facility. However, her excitement quickly turned to fear. The setting. The hospital was old, with parts of it dating back over a century. It had a reputation for being haunted, but Sarah dismissed these stories as mere urban legends. She was eager to start her new career and didn't let the rumors bother her. The incident. On her first day, Sarah was paired with an experienced nurse, Linda, who would be her mentor. Linda seemed nice but had a wary look in her eyes when she spoke about certain parts of the hospital. As they toured the facility, Sarah noticed that some areas were less well lit and had an eerie feel to them. During their rounds, Linda mentioned that the hospital had a closed wing where patients were no longer admitted. She said it was due to structural issues but quickly changed the subject. Sarah's curiosity was piqued, but she didn't press further. The horror. That evening, Sarah was assigned to the night shift to get a feel for the hospital's 24-hour operations. As she made her rounds, she found herself drawn to the closed wing. The door to this area was slightly ajar, and she couldn't resist taking a peek inside. The wing was dark and silent, with a heavy air of neglect. As Sarah walked down the hallway, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. She turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. It was a young girl in a hospital gown, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah called out to her, but the girl didn't respond. She walked towards her, but as she got closer, the girl vanished. Shaken, Sarah turned to leave but heard footsteps behind her. She spun around and saw the girl again, this time much closer, her face twisted in anguish. Panicking, Sarah ran back to the main area of the hospital and found Linda. She told her what had happened, and Linda's face grew grim. She explained that the closed wing had once housed a pediatric ward. Years ago, there was a fire, and several children had died. The hospital had shut down the wing and tried to move on, but strange occurrences continued to haunt the staff. Linda revealed that many nurses had seen the ghost of the young girl, believed to be one of the victims of the fire. The hospital's administration had chosen to ignore the sightings to avoid scaring off staff and patients. The aftermath. Sarah finished her shift but couldn't get the image of the girl out of her mind. She decided that she couldn't work in a place with such a dark history and resigned the next day. The hospital continued to operate, but the legend of the haunted wing persisted, scaring new employees and patients alike. Story 3: The Cursed Construction Site. The job. Mike was excited to start his new job as a construction worker on a high-profile project in the city. The job promised good pay and the opportunity to work on a landmark building. However, his first day turned out to be anything but routine. The setting. The construction site was enormous, covering several city blocks. The project was to build a massive skyscraper that would dominate the skyline. The site was bustling with activity, with workers and heavy machinery everywhere. The incident. On his first day, Mike was introduced to his team and given a safety briefing. His supervisor, Tom, mentioned that the site had been plagued by accidents and unusual occurrences. Mike brushed it off as typical construction site hazards. As the day progressed, Mike noticed that some of the workers seemed uneasy. They whispered among themselves and avoided certain areas of the site. Mike's curiosity grew, and he asked one of his co-workers, Dave, what was going on. Dave reluctantly told him that the site was believed to be cursed. It had been built on the grounds of an old cemetery that had been relocated to make way for the new building. However, many believed that the spirits of those buried there were not at peace. The horror. That afternoon, Mike was assigned to work in one of the deeper sections of the site. As he was digging, his shovel struck something hard. He bent down to inspect it and found what looked like a human bone. Mike's heart raced as he realized that the stories about the cemetery might be true. He decided to tell Tom, who instructed him to keep it quiet and continue working. Mike reluctantly obeyed, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. As the day went on, strange things began to happen. Tools went missing, machinery malfunctioned, and workers reported seeing shadowy figures out of the corner of their eyes. As the sun began to set, Mike found himself working alone in a particularly dark and isolated part of the site. Suddenly, he heard a low, moaning sound coming from behind him. He turned around but saw nothing. The moaning grew louder, and the air grew colder. Out of nowhere, a gust of wind knocked over a stack of supplies, and Mike saw a ghostly figure emerge from the shadows. It was a man, his face twisted in pain and anger. The figure pointed at Mike and then disappeared. Terrified, Mike ran back to the main area of the site and told Tom what had happened. Tom admitted that many workers had reported similar encounters, but that the project was too important to stop. He advised Mike to ignore it and focus on his work. The aftermath. Mike couldn't shake the feeling of unease and decided that he couldn't continue working on the site. He quit the next day, leaving behind the lucrative job. The construction project continued, but the site remained plagued by accidents and ghostly sightings. The skyscraper was eventually completed, but stories of the curse's site persisted, turning it into a local legend. Mike moved on to a new job, but the memory of that terrifying first day haunted him for years. These true horror stories serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most frightening experiences can happen when we least expect them, even on the first day of a new job.